One of the most emotional moments of the president's special joint address to Congress last week, of course, came when he evoked the memory of the late Senator Kennedy and revealed that he had recently received a letter from the senator written in May, 3 months before the senator's death. Mr. Kennedy had given instructions that the letter be delivered to the president upon his passing, and in it he expressed confidence that health care reform would finally pass this year, and he referred to health care reform as that great unfinished business of our society. I'm joined now by the late senator's oldest son, Ted Kennedy, Jr. Thank you for your time tonight, sir, and this being my first chance to say this to you directly, my great condolences.
Thank you, Keith. My father was a huge fan of this program, and it's great of you to have me on tonight.
I remain speechless at the thought. In the words of your father, the work goes on Capitol Hill on health care reform. Right now, though, it's getting hard to see where that work ends. How do you think your father would view the current state of the health care debate?
Well, I think, you know, at times like this, I really do miss my father because, as you know, health care was one of the causes of his life. And, you know, he was the master of bipartisan compromise. He was the guy who really could manage a national health care crisis like the one that we're in. And, you know, I just think, you know, I've been spending the last week, you know, talking about my father's new book, which is in stores right now, called True Compass. And in it, he really talks about not just his love of health care, but in all the major legislative battles that he went through in his 47 years of public service. And it's remarkable, some of the anecdotes and lessons that he learned as a result of all of these experiences.
I want to go to one of those in a moment, but I have one other bit of news from today that I'd love your reaction to. The state of Massachusetts got a step closer to getting another vote in health care debate and everything else in the Senate. The State House fulfilled your father's wish tonight. It approved the bill for an interim senatorial appointment. What's your reaction to that?
Well, you know, my dad did write that letter to the President of the Senate, the legislature, and Governor Patrick, wanting to have an interim person there, just in case. He knew the stakes were so high in this health care debate, and I think that's one of the reasons why he felt that it was important for somebody to be able to fill that seat on an interim basis, just because of this situation that we find ourselves in right now.
To the book, and one thing in it that is extraordinarily important at the moment, it's about health care and about empathy. I'd like to read this passage that he wrote about the time he spent with you in the hospital when you were fighting cancer, and I hope I can get through it. While Teddy was asleep or in treatment, I wandered the halls and the waiting rooms and sought out other parents who, like me, were keeping vigil over terribly ill sons and daughters. These were mostly working people, salesmen, secretaries, laborers, teachers, taxi drivers. Their long hours and modest savings allowed them to raise their families comfortably and with hope until catastrophe struck. It was in these conversations that the inhumanity of our healthcare system truly hit home to me. I began directing my Senate Health Committee's work towards the realities of lives such as those, the uninsured and the underinsured. I held hearings, but not always just ordinary hearings. Whenever feasible, I would take my committee and witnesses to hospitals in rural and inner city neighborhoods. I wanted my colleagues to be taken out of their comfort zones as I had been taken out of mine. I wanted them to experience the ravages of preventable illness and death, not as abstractions on a printed page, but as blood and bandages and needles and wails of pain down a hospital corridor and tears and mournings. Is that ultimately what's missing from the debate right now? The empathy? I mean, this abstract talk about process and about fights and very little mention of people and the reality of suffering.
Yes. Well, Keith, you know, my dad was an incredibly compassionate person and, you know, had empathy for, as you just mentioned, working people, school teachers, New Bedford fishermen, the union carpenters. He didn't really see policy in the abstract. He really wondered, you know, how those policies would impact real people. And that's really why you've seen, I think, such an outpouring of affection for my dad, and both not just from his Democratic colleagues, but indeed from, you know, his sometime political adversaries on the other side, because I think of the way that he saw through some of these different legislative issues. But But, you know, I think my experience with bone cancer at age 12, his own experience of having nearly lost his life in the plane crash, his own sister Rosemary experiences with intellectual disabilities, impacted him in a great way. And one of the things we really learn in the book is, you know, what an emotional man that my father really was. And of course he had to keep all of his emotions pretty intact because all of us in our family were depending on him, and he had to stay strong. But he reveals his strong emotional and very spiritual part of his life. Many of these stories were stories that, quite honestly, I had never even heard before. I felt like he was really speaking to me from the pages, and I'm grateful that he has produced this, this memoir, which I consider a real gift to me.
If you can stay through the commercial break, I'd like to talk more about the book, if that's all right.
Thank you, Keith.